in October. Our planning reforms alone will add £6.8 billion to the size of our economy by 2029-30. And real household disposable incomes, the money in people's pockets, will rise by £500 a year per person on average. There are no quick fixes, no shortcuts to prosperity, but we have returned stability to our economy. We have brought back security for working people, and we are delivering national renewal. Thank you very much. Right, I think I'm taking some questions. I'll start with Fiscal from the BBC.
Great. Sorry. Chancellor, thank you. The OBR has said that as a result of your welfare changes, that 250,000 people will be pushed into poverty. Is that a price worth paying for the rise in interest costs? And especially at this point, could you justify a £1 billion tax giveaway to the biggest tech multinationals in the world, or even contemplate it at a moment when so many more people are going to go into poverty?
Thank you very much for that question, Fiscal. As the OBR have also set out, they haven't accounted for any change in the number of people who are on benefits today who will go into work. And they set out in the document that they produced today that they're going to do some work ahead of the budget in the autumn to analyse our plans, the £1 billion of investment that we're putting in to have guaranteed personalised and tailored support for people to get back into work. And so we're confident that the changes that we are making and the support that we're providing to get people into work will result in more people having fulfilling careers, paying decent wages. And of course, that's the best way to lift families out of poverty. In terms of tax policy, it's up to the UK government to set tax policy for the UK economy, including the digital services tax. Now, the digital services tax was supposed to be temporary until there was a global agreement as part of Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 of the OECD agreement, but we believe that companies should pay tax in the countries in which they operate, which is why we introduced the digital services tax in the first place, and our views on that have not changed. Anushka Astana from ITV.
Thank you, Chancellor. What do you say to those who say your obsession with meeting self-imposed fiscal rules are punishing the most vulnerable?
Well, look, there's nothing progressive and there's nothing Labour about losing control of the public finances. That's what the previous government did, and that saw mortgage rates, rents go through the roof. It saw prices increase. And it wasn't the wealthy who paid the price for that. It was ordinary working people and those on fixed incomes. So you call the rules self-imposed, but of course markets impose discipline, and it is important to provide an anchor for people to know that this government will ensure that we are not living beyond our means and borrowing more than we can afford. And today, because the Tories doubled the national debt, we are spending £105 billion per year on debt interest costs. That's more than we spend on defence, the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice combined. So that's why this government wants to reduce debt and reduce the deficit so that we can spend more on the people's priorities rather than more in servicing those debt to interest costs. Beth Rigby from Sky.
Thank you, Chancellor. October was meant to be a once-in-a-generation budget. When you raised £40 billion in taxes, you said to people, I'm not coming back for more. But you have come back for more today. You've come back in the form of £14 billion of spending cuts. Is it time for you to level with people and admit that your plan hasn't protected them? And the truth is that you are going to have to come back for more tax rises or spending cuts in the budget in October unless you change your fiscal rules. Thanks.
The budget last October was a once-in-a-generation budget. It was needed to wipe the slate clean after 14 years of economic mismanagement and specifically the failure of the previous government to have done a spending review for so many years. And so we did have to make a number of difficult decisions on tax and welfare and on spending in the budget last year. But we have now wiped the slate clean. We'll never have to do a budget like that again. There's lots of speculation that I was going to change taxes today. The Tories were desperate to call this an emergency budget. It was far from it. We have found efficiencies in public spending. We've shifted money from ODA to defence. And of course, one of the ways that we restored the headroom was the fact that the OBR have scored one of our planning reforms, which not only results in the economy being £6.8 billion bigger by the end of the forecast, but has also provided £3.4 billion that we can use to restore that headroom. And I think that just goes to show that what I said during the election was that you can't tax and spend your way to prosperity. The previous government only knew tax and spend. They didn't know growth. We are growing the economy. The OBR have revised up every year after this one for growth and forecast that the economy will be bigger than they were envisaging in October.
So you're not coming back from that?
Well, I'm not going to write 4 years' worth of budgets. I've just delivered a spring statement today, but I think you can see through this spring statement how determined I am, how determined this government is to live within the means that we set ourselves in the budget last year and to grow our economy, because that is the way to sustainably improve living standards and have the money that we need for our public services. Ryan from The Sun.
Chancellor, more than three-quarters of that national insurance hike is set to be passed on to employees through lower wages. Is it fair to say that that rise really is a tax on working people?
Well, wages are rising at almost twice the rate of inflation. Of course, inflation fell today for the data that was published for February, while at the same time wages are increasing by 5.8, 5.9%, and that's been happening for the last few months. So already working people are seeing increases in what they're taking home every month. And from next week, the national living wage goes up by 6.7%. That amounts to a pay rise worth £1,400 for somebody who works on the national living wage full time, and that's 3 million people. So people are beginning to see in their pay packets extra money there. And of course, the OBR forecast today that by the end of this Parliament, the real household disposable income per person is set to be £500 higher than the plans we inherited from the previous Conservative government. So far from people's wages falling, as you're suggesting, wages, living standards, incomes are going up. And that's so important, because I want families to have more of their own money in their pockets to spend on the things that they want to do. Joe from Bloomberg.
Chancellor, the IPS's Paul Johnson says that the £10 billion of headroom you've given yourself against your main fiscal rule leaves you once again at the mercy of events. So can you just talk us through why you didn't give yourself more headroom? And aren't we now going to face months of speculation about what taxes you might have to increase, and that'd be bad for the economy?
So when I became Chancellor, the plans that I inherited from the previous government, it had just £6.5 billion headroom. That was the lowest headroom that a Chancellor had ever given himself, had given the government, had given the country at a budget. In autumn last year, I increased the size of the headroom by around 50% to take it to £9.9 billion. And despite the fact that, as the OBR have said, three-quarters of the deterioration in the headroom reflects higher government borrowing costs, similar to what you're seeing in Germany and France, we've managed to restore all of the headroom today. There were some people who said, oh, you can wait until the autumn to restore the headroom, but I've been really clear. Stability is the number one priority of this government, because that's how you bring the growth back to the economy. So we restored the headroom in full today. So people should have no doubt about my commitment and how seriously I take the fiscal rules. As I said today, they are non-negotiable. George Parker from the FT.
Chancellor, April the 2nd has been described as Liberation Day by the US President Donald Trump. How damaging would it be to the UK economy if a full-scale global trade war was unleashed on April the 2nd? And how confident are you that we might be able to negotiate a deal with the Trump administration to spare Britain from some of the worst effects of those tariffs?
Well, the OBR have set out today in their documents some different scenarios for what tariffs might mean for the UK economy. I think all of us were very pleased when our Prime Minister went to Washington just a few weeks ago to have those initial meetings with the US President. The last time Donald Trump was President of the United States, trade and investment flows between our two countries increased. 1 million British people work for American firms, and and 1 million Americans work for British firms. So you can see how closely our economies are intertwined, and tariffs between our economies, increased tariffs between our economies, will damage both of our economies, and we'll continue to make those make that case for free and open trade. And let's see where we get to in the next few weeks. But I recognise how important free and open trade is, not just with the United States, although they are our biggest single trading partner, but also with the EU. And that's why I'm pleased that the summit between the UK and the EU has been organised for May this year, because we also want better trade flows between us and our nearest neighbours in Europe, particularly to help small businesses who have been tied up in red tape since the botched Brexit deal that the previous government did. Right, got time for a couple of more questions. Lady there in the second row.
Thank you, Chancellor. Jessica Frank-Hughes from City AM. The Office for Budget Responsibility has said the government's Trade Employment Rights Bill is likely to have net negative economic impacts on employment, prices and productivity. Are you concerned the OBR might downgrade the UK's growth forecast based on the bill? And what do you say to those who warn this goes against your efforts to get more people into jobs?
As we grow the economy, we want ordinary working people to benefit, and that's why we are banning exploitative zero-hour contracts, fire and rehire, and also it's why we are increasing the national living wage, because we want to incentivise people to go into work and for that work to offer the security and dignity that should come from employment. Now, the OBR haven't put anything in their forecast today about the Employment Rights Bill because it's still working its way through Parliament, but we're confident that it will result in ordinary working people having more money in their pockets, but also having the security to spend that money because they don't have to worry from week to week whether they'll be in work or how many hours they'll get. Lady there.
Harriet Line, Daily Mail. Your welfare cuts will plunge 250,000 people into relative poverty, but at the same time you've accepted lavish freebies, including £600 tickets in a VIP box to watch Sabrina Carpenter. Do you regret accepting those tickets, and will you repay the money?
The 250,000 people is based on absolutely no one going into work who was previously out of work, and yet we're putting £1 billion in for targeted employment support to get people back to work. So I'm confident that our plans, far from increasing poverty, will actually result in more people having fulfilling work, paying a decent wage to lift themselves and their families out of poverty. Now, it may come as a surprise to some of you that I'm not personally a huge Sabrina Carpenter fan, being a 46-year-old woman, but a member of my family did want to go and see that concert. I'm not in a position now that I can easily just go and sit in a concert, and some of the things that I might have been able to do in my everyday life in the past are not so easy now. And so I had advice that it would be better to be in a box. The owners of the O2 had a box, tickets that are not available to buy, and they said that I could go in there, and that was better for security reasons. I do recognise that people think that that's a bit odd, but that's the reason why I did that, rather than just being in normal seats, which, to be honest, for me and my family would have been a lot nicer and a lot easier. Right. Yeah, gentleman there. There's no mic, so just stand up.
Oh, sorry. Emilio from Politico.
So you're so unused to being asked, you don't even...
No, I don't. I don't know how these things work. Thank you. Yesterday, the government gave planning approval for the Lower Thames crossing. I was reading about a Chinese company that's building a massive underwater tunnel in just over a year. They've done the bit under the water already in about 110 days. Since you want to build stuff faster and get growth faster, why don't we ask these Chinese guys to come along and show us how it's done?
I don't think it's the fact that it's a Chinese company. I think it's probably more to do with the fact that they don't have such onerous rules around bats and newts and frogs or whatever. And so that's why we're reforming our planning system to make it easier to build in Britain. Now, that Lower Thames crossing, as I said in my speech in January, I do want private finance to help build that. But the best way we can get it build is to back the builders, not the blockers, and get through that bureaucracy that currently holds back far too much investment, whether it is transport, energy, or indeed housing. I'll just take maybe one more question. Yeah.
I'm Natasha Clark from LBC. Yesterday, the Deputy Prime Minister told LBC that she thought taxation was at a sweet spot. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, we had to make difficult decisions in the budget last year, including increasing taxes on some of the wealthiest and also asking businesses to pay more in tax. That was necessary to put our public finances back on a firm footing and also to properly fund our public services. I think the most important thing is that when people pay money in tax, that we treat it with the respect that we would treat our own money. And for too long, that hasn't happened, whether it is COVID contracts that went to friends and donors of the Conservative Party, whether that was a bloated bureaucracy, quangos getting out of control. And I'm determined that when we ask people to pay tax to fund public services, it actually goes to people's priorities. More money in the NHS, more money in our schools, and crucially in the changed world that we face today, more money in our defence. Thank you very much.